The only other thing I would like to say is this, is that as Dr. Mohinder Singh has said, Guru Nanak is in a way a bridge between Hindus and Muslims. Only today I was discussing, or Jilly was discussing or telling me, because she, my partner, is working on a book on Nizamuddin, and she was telling me about the links between Baba Farid and Guru Nanak, which of course is a wonderful example of this link. And all I can say is that never in my lifetime and in my experience of India has there been a greater need for proper and full understanding between religions. And I have always constantly, wherever I have talked, whatever books I have written, I have always said that at its heart, the greatness of India lies in the fact that it is a country which understands that there are many different ways to God, and that followers of one way can learn a lot from followers of another way. And as I said before, never, I think, in the time I've been in this country, has there been a greater need for emphasizing that message. So with that, I won't stand in the way of this lecture, and I'll hand over to Ambassador Navtej Singh.
Sir Mark, Dr. Mohinder Singh, and friends, very distinguished gathering here, and I know many of you have actually changed appointments, turned your afternoons around to be here. I'm honored and touched that you have made this effort. Thank you so much. This is several special things at the same time as far as I am concerned. The Southern is always something that has been close to my heart. I think I've perhaps mentioned here before that I actually used to come to the Southern with my father when this building did not exist. And it used to be, the Southern meetings used to be held in different Sundays in different houses. And that was way back in the 60s. And I've been coming ever since after that. And it's a privilege to have Mark present at this gathering, as he was once before at the launch of Savage Harvests, the stories of partition of my father, which I had translated. And I have always held him in great, great esteem from the early 80s when I started working in the press division of the Ministry of External Affairs. And Mark was a sort of a walking a symbol of what was actually happening in the country. And I particularly remember 1984, when Mark and Satish used to come back from the Golden Temple, come to XP division, and before they reached the spokesman's room, I used to waylay them in the corridor and get the latest of what was happening in the Harmandir Sahib, and of course their book on Punjab in 1984 then became a classic. So I'm very privileged that he has agreed to chair this meeting. The third thing is that this is a very special year as far as I think the world is concerned. I don't want to restrict ourselves to either the Sikh community or to Punjab. I think because 550 years of the birth anniversary of Guru Nanak, I have faint memories of the 500th anniversary, and I know that it was celebrated. But I think the 550th anniversary is certainly being celebrated in a much bigger way. The technology and the global reach that is available to us gives us an opportunity of disseminating the message in a far more effective and way. And as was mentioned, the world needs this message. So I would start, I would focus today only on the traveler and householder part, but I do want to start with a point which some of you who have heard me before speak on the subject may find repetitive, but I think it bears repetition because that really sets the perspective for discussing different aspects of Guru Nanak. And that is that 550 years is really not a very long time in human history. It might seem a lot to us given our own lifespans, but 550 years is not that long. It's actually the blink of an eye as far as human history is concerned. And we seem to remember very well what else was happening at that time. Just to put it in perspective, I think those of us who live in Delhi know very well the Lodi tombs. And these are still fresh reminders of the dynasty that ruled Hindustan when Baba Nanak was living. Not far from these tombs is Humayun's tomb, who was actually fighting to save his empire when Guru Nanak passed away. And if you go a little further south, you find the Qutub Minar, which it's amazing to recall, actually predates Guru Nanak by about 2 centuries. So in other parts of the world, other things were happening which seemed to us very fresh and very new. Christopher Columbus was stumbling upon the United States. Vasco da Gama found the route to India at the same time. Magellan completed the first voyage around the world, and the Corpus Christi College that still stands at Oxford was started, and Martin Luther King started the Reformation. Within 50 years of Guru Nanak's passing, Shakespeare would start writing his plays. So, and Shakespeare is available in paperback. So, the point is that we are not dealing here with an ancient mythical personality, somewhere lost in the hoary mists of time. But we are dealing with somebody who's very immediate. So he is young in human memory, and his impact is still relevant. Now, why does it sound remote? It sounds remote to us because unlike some of the other personalities and events that I have mentioned, there is lack of precise historical detail about his life. There are hardly any direct available extant records of what the episodes in his life were, where all did he travel and in which order, because he saw himself only as a messenger, sent by an act of providence and transmitting the received divine world from supreme reality to men. So if he had started giving a detailed account of his own life, that would have contradicted his message. So what do we have? We have the writings of Bhai Gurdas, who was the poet, the historian, the philosopher, up to the 6th Guru, and who actually sat with Guru Arjan and wrote out or put together the Ad Granth in its first formation. In Bhai Gurdas's verse, we find some references to his travels and some references to his events of his life. For the rest, we have to depend on the Janam Sakhis, which were written decades after his death. And there are several cycles of these with their own differences, and the audience is well acquainted with these, so I will not go into that. But ultimately, all this is not important, because all this fades into the background when you actually see the strength and the beauty of his message. So the events only serve to illustrate the message. And I want to say this because a lot of times we concentrate too much on the event and not on the message. And this message is contained in superb poetry set to divine classical music, and about 1,000 of his hymns are contained in the Granth Sahib. So once we see his writings, this brings us in close proximity immediately to a tremendous intellect, a deep philosopher, a phenomenal poet, and a spiritual master. Now, to try and encapsulate his legacy and philosophy in a few minutes is an overly ambitious task, and I'm not going to attempt it. But the series of lectures that the Southern has planned over the years will, I'm sure, highlight several different aspects of his philosophy. For today's purpose, I would like to concentrate on two aspects: his extensive travels and his years later at Kartarpur as a householder. He is said, the Southern has kindly provided some slides, which I'm pleasantly surprised to have. We don't have an exact synchronization, but they will bring to a visual display of some of the things that I'm saying. He's said to have spent more than 20 years. The historian Hariram Gupta puts this variously at 22 years or 25 years in different places in his book, and on the road, carrying out the mission that he was charged with, to spread the ultimate truth and put mankind on the path to salvation. In the process, these travels also gave him an opportunity to observe the working of the religions of the day in actual practice, and to debate and discuss these matters of the spirit with sages and seers. He met innumerable fakirs, darwishes, siddhs, yogis, and all sorts of people, and talked to them and debated, and always in a spirit of dialogue. And wherever he could, it also gave him an opportunity to dispel the blind beliefs that were very prevalent those days. There was a this slide, for instance, illustrates the famous story at Hardwar, where he actually went into the water and he saw the pilgrims throwing water to the sun towards the rising sun, and he turned around and started throwing water in the opposite direction. And when he was asked as to what is this all about, are you crazy? So he said, what are you doing? He said, we are throwing water to our ancestors. And he said, well, you know, I left some fields back in the west, and nobody is there to give them water, so I'm throwing water. So but how can your water reach your fields? So he said, well, if it can reach your ancestors, then surely it can reach my fields. So these are the kind of Janam Sakhis and stories that we are familiar with, and which actually showed how he practically wanted to show that true salvation does not lie in either tradition or ritualism or superstition. And Bhai Gurdas says it very beautifully. He says, Ditthe Hindu Turki sabhi peer paikambari qaumi katele andh andhe khuye thele. He met fakirs and pandits, but he found that the blind were pushing other blind into the well, quite simply. Now, as far as travel is concerned, let's remember that in those days there was no fast or sophisticated means of travel. But he did take, by broad belief now it's believed, 4 long journeys or odysseys. Coincidentally, these are called udasis. It's got nothing to do with Odyssey, but udasi in the sense of detachment, of leaving the house and leaving his house and just going wandering in 4 different directions. We actually see some of the books available in the library upstairs. You can find detailed routes, even maps showing these journeys. But I believe, or I'm open to correction, that these are not based on any concrete evidence, but on the Janam Sakhi references to various places and the commonly used routes of the day. So when you combine these, you can say that, okay, if he did go to Kamrup in Assam, then probably he traveled on this route. Or he did go to Mecca, then he probably went either through Jeddah and came back through the desert, because that most probably that was the route being followed those days. But these 4 udasis, it is believed, were as far as Assam in the east, present-day Sri Lanka in the south, Mount Kailash in the north, and Mecca, Medina in the west. Some accounts take Nanak even further afield. They take him through Palestine, Jerusalem, Turkey. A few years ago, I came across out whether there was a reference of Guru Nanak in Istanbul. There is an inscription right next to the Bosphorus, which a lot of people have dissected to say that it says Nanak. But then it is believed that it probably says Hanak, and that is what is causing the confusion. I couldn't find anything else which showed that he has been to Turkey. Jerusalem, I personally looked a lot, but there was no possibility of finding anything of a wandering itinerant preacher. There were hundreds and thousands of preachers coming to Jerusalem in the Middle Ages. But there is, since Baba Farid was mentioned, there is the Baba Farid Hospice in Old Jerusalem. And I would believe that if Guru Nanak ever went to Jerusalem, the only place he would go to would be to the Baba Farid Hospice. So I spent a lot of time at the hospice, but only in the belief and sort of spiritual belief that possibly, if he ever came to Jerusalem, this is where he would have come. But his mission, and going back again to the message, took him to snowy heights, burning deserts, little villages and mighty capitals, among the ordinary people as well as the learned, to fairs, temples, festivals, khanaqahs, mosques. Again, in the Janam Sakhis, there is no prescribed, no agreed geographical order of these travels. But again, let's go back to Bhai Gurdas. He says, the Baba traversed 9 regions of the earth as far as the land stretched. Baba tare char chak, nokhand prithvi sacha toa. So he actually, the 9 regions of the earth, as seen at that time, he said to have traveled. This shows the immensity of his travel. And today, you can find shrines and gurdwaras. You can find impressions of Guru Nanak's sandals in different places and local legends. Some of the other things about his travel we know from Bhai Gurdas. Nanak was accompanied by Mardana on his travels, who carried and played the rabab, and also became an interesting protagonist of many of the sakhis that are attached to these travels. One cycle of Janam Sakhis and several illustrations show Bhai Bala, but that does not seem to be borne out by more evidence. According to some sources, Guru Nanak dressed in strange clothes that could not be defined or identified with any sect and symbolized the universality of his message. He wore a loose long shirt of a Muslim darwish, but of a brownish red color of the Hindu sannyasi. Around his waist he wore a white cloth belt like a fakir. A short turban partly covered a Qalandar's conical cap in the manner of Sufi wanderers. His slippers were often of 2 different colors and design. Sometimes he said, in some sources, that he wore a garland of human bones. On his journey west that took him to Mecca, he wore a shirt that was blue. He donned a cap, held a staff with a holy book under his arm, and an earthen goblet and prayer mat slung over his shoulder. On the journey north, he is believed to have worn leather on his feet and wound a rope around his body in view of the extreme weather. These different ways of dressing for each different occasion, again quoted by Bhai Gurdas, he says, Babe pek banaya udasi ki reet chalai, chadya sodan tart lukai. So, alag-alag pace bana ke, he was traveling. As far as his udasis and Janam Sakhis are concerned, he was spreading his message in different ways. I mentioned one story. Now we can carry on. I don't have the time to talk about all the events, but I would like to choose 3. Simply because firstly, they seem to be my personal favorites, and also they illustrate best the debate and discourse that happened with the people he met. He was neither trying to criticize another religion, he was not trying to propagate a particular religion, but he was trying to, through the idea of dialogue and discourse. Dialogue is a traditional philosophical method of getting a truth across. You can go to Plato's dialogues and come up with the same methods. And similarly, it's the dialogue of the yogis, and in other philosophical treatises, you find the instrument of dialogue. So these three stories, for instance, show his methodology. On the first Udasi, I think we have a picture also. Yeah. Guru Nanak and Mardana reached the Jagannath temple in Puri in Orissa. This temple is known for its annual procession, when the idol is mounted on a huge chariot and multitudes gather and vie with each other for the privilege of pulling the chariot. It's an inexorable sea of humanity, and this is the phenomenon that gives the word Juggernaut to the English language. There is more than one version of what happened here. But one version is that when Guru Nanak and Mardana camped near the temple, their hymns and music attracted several devotees on their way to the temple, annoying the temple priests. One day the chief priest came to Nanak and invited him to join the arti or the evening prayer in the temple, and Guru Nanak readily accompanied him. It was a beautiful ceremony conducted at dusk. The priest placed earthen lamps filled with ghee on a bejeweled salver, decorated with flower petals and sweet incense. They lit the wicks and swung the salver like a pendulum in front of the image, while the congregation sang hymns, blew conches, and tolled the bells. Nanak sat unmoved through the ceremony, and when the priests expressed their anger and surprise at this, he responded with a song which is now, of course, part of the Granth Sahib. The song describes the celestial arti in which the sky, the sun, the moon, the stars, the wind, the forests, and the unstruck music are all paying obeisance to the great Creator. This, according to Nanak, was the true arti that could be offered to God. And as one translation is, the sky the salver, the sun and moons the lamps, the stars studding the heavens are the pearls. The fragrance of sandal is the incense, fanned by the winds, all for thee. The great forests are the flowers. What a beautiful arti is being performed for you, O destroyer of fear. The Jagannath temple visit is also important for the meeting between Guru Nanak and the Bengal reformer, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It is recorded that they talked to each other and sang hymns together. Also, Debendranath Tagore, the father of Rabindranath, listened to the arti being sung at the Harmandir Sahib and was so moved that he decided to learn Gurmukhi to be able to read the Adi Granth, and also included the arti in the Bangla script of his autobiography. The second story that I wanted to touch on covers the visit to the north, the third Udasi, part of the third Udasi. He traveled widely in the Himalayas, and several scholars have constructed possible routes they could have taken based on local traditions still extant in the mountains and the gurdwaras founded down the centuries. Legend has traced his steps to Himachal Pradesh, present-day Himachal, Jammu and Kashmir, Uttar Pradesh, Sikkim, Ladakh, even Nepal and Tibet. Many of you who have been to Ladakh and to Pathar Sahib would recall the impression that exists of Guru Nanak's back in a rock. And there is in a Gurdwara in Kathmandu an impression of his sandals. And I remember when I was in Bhutan, Bhutanese pilgrims used to regularly visit Revalsar, which is holy to the Sikhs as well as to the Buddhists. And in some versions, they refer to Guru Nanak as Lama Nanak. The central event of this northern Udasi is the visit to Mount Sumer, which it's recorded in all the Janam Sakhis. It's mentioned by Bhai Gurdwas, and it is the present-day Mount Kailash, the abode of Shiv and Parvati. There on Mount Kailash and the crystal waters of Mansarovar, which is the source of the Sutlej, and the Rakesh Tal, is based the meeting of Nanak with 84 Siddhas, which is depicted in that painting. Among these is said to be Gorakhnath, Machendranath, Charpatnath, or perhaps successors of these ancient souls who had been meditating in the snow for decades and possessed great power and wisdom. Now this meeting is depicted in different ways. Bhai Gurdas has written about it, and in the Guru Granth Sahib itself, in Guru Nanak's own words, in 73 very complex verses in the Siddh Goshti, in the Ramkali Rag, is related his discussions with the Siddhs, not particularly only in this meeting, but here as well as in another meeting which he had later, and with several meetings which he had with other holy men. So he's put it all together in this. The entire debate is, how do you reach salvation, what is the right way to live, and so on, very basic philosophical questions. But this meeting in particular, Bhai Gurdas's version is much easier to understand and to relate as one particular meeting. In this, according to Bhai Gurdas, the Siddhs expressed amazement in seeing Nanak. And they said, "O youthful one, what power brings you to these heights? Who is it that you worship?" And he replied, "The eternal Lord alone." Then they asked him how the world below was faring, and Guru Nanak made no secret of what he felt. He told them that darkness, sin and injustice had taken over the world. Corruption was rampant, the fence itself had begun to eat the crop. The wise Siddhas had escaped into the remote caves and mountains. Who would then redeem the world? Siddh chhap baithe parvati, konu jagat ko par utare. It's very straightforward in Bhai Gurdas's words. They then argued with him that it is not possible to be part of the world and to follow the path of meditation and spirituality. And that's when Guru Nanak replied that one has to be like a lotus in the water and remain dry and clean. Or the duck, the murgabi as he calls it, the duck that actually swims against the current and remains dry. And so one has to be part of the world and yet be unaffected. And the only way that can be done is by meditating on the name of the Creator. This was the second major dialogue that comes out from the Janam Sakhis. And the third one is, let's go to the West. Everybody knows the story of his visit to Mecca, Medina, so I'm not going to repeat that. But on the way back, he is said to have, he did go, there's evidence, or to Baghdad. And this is again mentioned by Bhai Gurdas. Fir Baba gaya Baghdad nu, bahari kiya asthana, ik Baba akal roop, duja rababi mardana. So he actually went, sat. Baghdad was a great civilization, a great Islamic civilization at that time, a famed city. He's said to have sat outside in a graveyard with Mardana and told Mardana ki rabab ched. And then they started singing the Gurbani, and people, different versions, but one version is people came out and said this is un-Islamic. They started stoning him, but then they were completely bewitched by the sweetness, the mellifluousness of his voice. And then they called the big Pir of Baghdad, Pir-e-Dastgir, who came to Nanak and asked him, what faith do you belong to, and what sect of fakirs do you come from? And Puchya Firke Dastgir, according to Bhai Gurdas, Puchya Firke Dastgir, Kaun Fakir, Kiska Gharyana? And Mardana replies on Guru Nanak's behalf, Nanak kal vich aya, Rab Fakir ikko pehchana, Dhart Akash chau dis jana. That he has come to, in this age of Kali Yuga, It's a terrible time, and he has rejected all fakirs except the Supreme Being, who is all-pervasive on earth, in the sky, and in four directions. So in this discourse carried on, another famous Pir of Baghdad, Bahlol, is then said to have come and had discourses with Guru Nanak, and soon became his complete follower. Guru Nanak is believed to have stayed there for 4 months with Bahlol and his son, and even today the shrine that is said to be of Guru Nanak is actually the tomb of Bahlol. And I think there is an inscription which I believe a soldier in the First World War, a Sikh soldier, actually discovered. And there is a beautiful poem by Swami Anandacharya, who was a Hindu itinerant monk, who wrote it after visiting the place of this meeting. I'll just quote 2 verses from it. What peace from Himalaya's lonely caves and forests thou didst carry to the vine groves and rose gardens of Baghdad. What light from Badrinath's snowy peak thou didst bear to illumine the heart of Bahlol, thy saintly Persian disciple. 8 fortnights Bahlol hearkened to thy words on life and the path. Thy words on life and the path, and spring eternal, while the moon waxed and waned in the pomegranate grove besides the grassy desert of the dead. Now, this is written by a Swami who was traveling through in the 20s of the 19th century. Finally, at the end of the travels of more than 20 years, crisscrossing the land in all directions, it was time for Guru Nanak to go home and to Kartarpur, very much on the news nowadays, on the banks of the Ravi. Here he is said to have shed his traveling dress and taken on the garb of a householder, a simple householder and a farmer. And Bhai Gurdas records this. Fir Baba aya Kartarpur, pe kudasi sagal utara, peri sansari kapde, manji bat kiya avtara. So basically, he settled down after enough travels, because during his travels he had met and talked to all kinds of people and dispelled wherever he saw them the forces of darkness, superstition and ritual. And he had also been spreading the message, a simple message of true love, equality, compassion and the oneness of God, as well as truthful living. He had explained through his discourses the all-pervasive nature of the Creator. But now it was time to show in practical terms that renunciation and asceticism are not the answer to life's challenges. True religious discipline has to be forged while living in the world, amidst all the challenges, amidst all the temptations, troubles and joys. Because in his view, the spirit of affirmation of the world is a very important aspect. The world is real. It has been created by the Creator. You can't run away from it. You have to live in it. So the best thing is to live in it in the right way. Because this world is an expression of a divine purpose. So you can't deny the divine purpose. In the process, he also supported institutions like marriage, family, society, and brought them within the ambit of religion. Now in Kartarpur, he occupies himself, and there's a very nice slide, occupied himself with vigorous work in the fields. And he also wrote down many of the hymns that he had sung elsewhere, including the Japji, which is said to have been written at Kartarpur. A community began to gather at Kartarpur and grew steadily. Men of all callings and faiths, householders, ascetics, destitute mendicants, wealthy merchants, Brahmins and Darweshes, Hindus and Muslims, they came there drawn by his message of piety and humanity. In the words of Professor Puran Singh, Guru Nanak radiated love and faith and attracted people like light attracts moths. This was not a monastic order, and was being built up, but a fellowship of ordinary men engaged in ordinary occupations of life, farmers, artisans, traders, and people who were considered members of the lower professions. All of them had forsworn their previous allegiances. For instance, Guru Tegh Bahadur, Guru Angad, when he was Lena, was a follower of the Devi, and then he just came there and became a follower of Guru Nanak. They had forsworn previous allegiances and had taken Guru Nanak as their guide and teacher. Now, Kartarpur also saw the institution of the setting up of several institutions. First of all, the establishment of the Dharamsala, or the place of worship, which would later become what we know today as the Gurdwara. Because when the Guru Granth Sahib was given the status of Guru and was put in the Dharamsala, it became the house of the Guru and became a Gurdwara. Bhai Gurdas says, Dharamsal Kartarpur, Sad Sangat Sachkhand Vasaya, Vai Guru Guru Gur Shabad Sunaya. So the Dharamsal at Kartarpur is inhabited by the holy congregation as heaven itself, and the word of God was given by the Guru to the people. In fact, the metaphor of Dharamsal is also very interesting because it shows that Guru Nanak wrested religion back from the priestly classes, who had, because of their vested interests, made it moribund and tradition-bound and very, very cryptic. But he restored it to the householder. In Bhai Gurdas's words, Karkar andar Dharamsal, Hove Kirtan Sada Vasoa. So every home has become a Dharamsal. A number of other traditions were set up at Kartarpur, in particular the traditions of Kirtan and Langar, or in other words, Sangat and Pangat. The Kirtan included the singing of the Japji and Asa Diwar in the mornings, the Sodar in the evening, as well as the Soila before retiring. The singing in Sangat or congregation of these compositions in praise of the divine induces a mood of contemplation of God's name, as anybody who has listened to a good classical Kirtan session will testify. Now, these hymns were received wisdom through the agency of the Guru, but the Sangat also had a social implication, the creation of a brotherhood or a fraternity. A member of the Sangat was known as Bhai, or literally brother. The Sangat brought together men not just in spiritual pursuit, but also in worldly affairs, forging community of purpose as well as action, based on equality and brotherhood. The disciples mixed together without consideration of social status, rank, or caste. Bhai Gurdas mentions the names of leading Sikhs of the time, or members of the Sangha, even mentioning some castes or professions. Among the disciples mentioned are Mardana and Daulat Khan Lodi, both Muslims. Buddha or Bhai Buddha, a Jat of the Randhava caste, also Ajita Randhava, Firan, a Khera Jat, Malo and Mango, who were musicians, and several others of different castes. I think about 19 specific people have been mentioned by Gurdas in his var. The Sangat thus became a melting point of the high and low. The Langar, which is the other institution, or the community kitchen, where the rich and poor sat down in a pangat, or simply a line, to eat the same food irrespective of caste or social standing. Now, this was a key element of social restructuring and social engineering, because it changed the religious and social life and brought to it the center of it became the spirit of seva, or voluntary service, which even today really marks out the Sikh religion all over the world globally. I mean, you have a tsunami, or you have an earthquake, or you have a terrorist attack somewhere, and the first thing you see all around the world is langar being served by Sikh groups. This way, this langar, I believe, was different from the soup kitchen which was run in the Sufi khankas. Because there it was more in the nature of an almhouse. But langar turned this practice into a positive and active act of brotherhood. Now the years Guru Nanak spent as a householder after his travels, and of course also between his travels, were a demonstration of his belief in practical virtue rather than abstract piety. The lessons to the community of the followers that gathered around him were very simple, which have become a creed today. Kirt karo, do work, naam japo, meditate on his name, and vant chako, share in charity. The society at Kartarpur thus became a precursor of historical Sikhism. Caste, icon worship, empty ritual were its main rejection, and its mainstay was a fervent faith in the divine, ethical living, and a full affirmation of life and creations. Its ideals of fraternity and brotherhood, sangat and pangat, as well as service and recitation of the Bani, would prove to be essential elements of self-identity, established in Guru Nanak's time itself and further crystallized by his successors. Ultimately, they would come to full flower under Guru Gobind Singh through the formation of the Khalsa. So with these words, I would like to thank you for your attention and your patience. Thank you.
I was really transformed to a different world, and then I realized lecture is over. Can't we designate him as Professor of Eminence? I think you will agree. I was transformed.
Yes, I would just like to say that it was a fascinating lecture. Two points really struck me as, again, as saying before, so relevant today. The first was that Guru Nanak established traditions, but clearly he did not believe that we should be bound by traditions, tied up in traditions. Tradition is a wonderful thing, provided it doesn't become something which obstructs the spiritual life or obstructs social life. The other thing which, and I'm sure Navtej will correct me if I'm wrong here, but what I find very interesting nowadays is a number of people who say to you, I am spiritual, I want to be spiritual, but I don't need a religion, I don't need a church, I don't need to be a Sikh, I don't need to be a Muslim. And I think that the fact that Guru Nanak established a community is tremendously important for people like that, because people who try and go off on their own without following one of the great traditions and joining in communities, I think end up in a very barren position. But what I think we all need to do is to learn from Guru Nanak that these communities must be lively communities who are primarily bound together by the practice of meditation and the practice of trying, putting it crudely, to be in contact with the Supreme Being. Again, so often communities become, instead of helpful institutions, become institutions which bind people, which hold people back, which end up fighting with each other, or fighting within the community, or fighting with other communities. We need communities. Communities are tremendously important, as I understand it, but they must be living communities, and I think continually examining themselves rather than looking out and examine other communities.